Hey everyone, welcome to iCommunicate. If you've ever struggled with holding people accountable, coaching, and difficult conversations, you're in the right place. iCommunicate provides fresh perspectives and actionable insights to coach leaders, teams, and individuals. Welcome to iCommunicate. I'm your host, Mark Altman, founder and CEO of MindsetGo. And today, great topic. One of the most under-discussed and most assumed topics. How do you know if someone's coachable? I'm joined as always by my partner in crime, my producer, Mike Kamali. Great to have you, Mike, as always.
Great to be back again.
All right. So, as I was reflecting on this show today, I was reflecting on my career as a youth sports coach. And for the better part of 20 to 25 years, I coach kids in basketball and baseball. And one of the things I was reflecting on is if you're coaching kids, and let's say if we're talking about an age group, how about let's go with maybe 7th, 8th grade level kids. Okay, just so everybody has some context. So I was remembering as I was coaching, if you had asked me as a sports coach, how would I say, what would be my criteria, my success template to say that kid's coachable? And here's what I thought about. This is when I was coaching. This is what I used to think about, right? One, someone who listens, right? Is that kid listening? Okay. Second thing I came up with is someone who follows directions. And the third thing I thought about is someone who's actually applying what they learned. Now think baseball for a second, okay? Think about a kid who is learning how to field the ball from their position. So now what does a baseball coach typically do every practice? They hit ground balls to the kid so they can practice their fielding skills. Now, here's what I want you to think about as we go through this show today. If you're in a position to coach, and by the way, if you're in a position to coach, how do you know? Because you don't have to be in a position of authority to be a coach. You could be a child and coach your parents. You could be a team member in the workplace and coach your boss. You could coach a peer. You could coach a friend. You don't have to be in a position of authority to coach. So now, think about this for a second. So we are in the process of coaching this student athlete, and we're hitting them ground balls, and they're not doing what they're told. Okay, so let's run through our theories in our head. Well, I guess they weren't listening, right? Because we did tell them what to do. Now, hear what I'm saying. I guess they weren't listening because we told them what to do and they didn't do it. Someone who's not following directions, same thing. We told them the directions, they're not doing it. And then someone who's not applying what they've learned and what they've been taught, is it they're just trying to be difficult? Is it that 8th grade shortstop is sitting at shortstop and going, I know what I'll do. I won't follow directions solely to upset the coach. So Mike, I want to ask you a question here. We talked about this. You coach pickleball. So I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that with all the people you coach, and we talked about this the other day, you coach people of different ages, different levels of experience. So when someone doesn't do what you quote unquote coach them to do, is and you're human, so this would be fair. Does those thoughts go through your head? Well, geez, I guess they're not listening. I guess they don't know how to follow directions. I guess they're just not caring enough about applying what they're learning. When you get frustrated, do those thoughts ever go through your head?
Oh, without a doubt. My initial thought process, if they're not picking up after I've told them 3 or 4 times now, get your paddle up or move up or anything along those lines, it's, man, you really just don't want to put in the effort here. You're just doing this because you aren't giving enough effort, or you're not paying enough attention when I'm speaking, because you're not getting it.
Right. And so this is important, right? Because, and I want to ask you one more question, Mike, before I make this point. So what are some theories you could have? You know, at Mindset Go, one of our most critical norms we coach is to default to curiosity and suspend judgment. So let's default to curiosity and suspend judgment. What would be some other potential non-malicious reasons why someone wouldn't be applying what you've taught them? Like, what would be a theory that you would say, well, yeah, I don't think it's malicious. I think it could be,
It could be that I'm not explaining it clearly.
or okay.
I default then to, if they're not getting it after 4 or 5 times, is it something that I'm doing wrong? Am I the one making the mistake? And I don't think that they're doing it maliciously off the bat. My thought process is usually that, oh, I have to explain it a different way, but I know where you're going with this one. So,
Well, okay. So for our listeners, here's what I want you to think about. The reason I started with this anecdote is because if you listen to what I said, the person, this student athlete, isn't listening, isn't following directions, isn't applying what I'm learning. So as the coach, the implication is I've been amazing. I've explained everything perfectly. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And it's the child's fault. The child is failing me. The child is just not coachable because I'm perfect. I did everything I was supposed to do, and it's all the child's fault. That's the implication when we make those comments. And what's tricky about coaching is the first aspect to me of being a good coach is practicing the behavioral norm of looking inward before blaming outward. When people disappoint us, frustrate us, don't meet our expectations, instead of going, why are they disappointing me? Why aren't they doing what they're supposed to do? What was my role in that problem? Did I have a role in that problem? Let me look inward. Let me be curious because it does take two to tango. So the question is, how do you know if someone's coachable? Because if we just said that it could be them, it could be me, I don't know. How do I know? What's the formula? Here is the ultimate formula and a huge takeaway for you on this show today. Now, at Mindset Go, we get calls from companies all the time where someone will call myself or one of our other facilitators up and they'll say, hey, we got a question for you. We have an executive, and these are the phrases I often hear. Things like, they're a toxic high performer. They're a toxic performer. They're not playing nicely in the sandbox with others. These are the kinds of things. And they'll say, Mark, I got to pick your brain. Should we coach them in or should we coach them out? Are they coachable? These are the 3 fundamental questions I ask. Number 1, is the person you're sharing with me about, are they aware of what the problems are? And when I say aware, I want to be very clear to everybody. I don't mean aware because you've jammed the problems down their throat and told them they're a failure or they're bad or they're critical. I mean self-aware. I mean that they could say, if we were watching and observing their behavior as a quote unquote toxic high performer, right? And if they send rude, hostile emails and texts when they're triggered, self-aware means they would say, yeah, I have a tendency to do that. Yeah, I can do that. I can be reactive, right? That's what I mean by being self-aware. So question number 1 is, are they self-aware of what they're doing wrong? Okay. Question number 2, are they accountable? Are they willing to own it? And let me be clear to everybody. Just because someone's self-aware doesn't automatically mean they're accountable. So self-aware is they have awareness of what their behavioral tendencies are, what their thought patterns are. Accountable would be, I want to fix this. I can understand the impact this has. This isn't who I want to be. I own this. That's what accountable means. So are they aware? Are they accountable? And part 3 is, are they motivated to do it differently? right? So that is the success template to know if someone's coachable: aware, accountable, motivated. And here's what it comes down to. If you are the person that made that call to me and you said to me, even one of those three things is lacking, you got problems. You got a serious issue in your hand. And I'm going to tell you, the motivated piece, which I'm going to get to in a second, I would say, believe it or not, that can be salvageable. The aware and accountable thing, aware, I would say in order of salvageability, motivation 1, aware 2, accountability is the hardest. Because if people aren't willing to own their stuff, that's really where the hardest thing is. And so when we look at this model, this success template for coachability, aware, accountable, and motivated, what I want you to reflect on is, as a coach, can you coach awareness? I mean, how many times in life do we mumble to ourselves, how do they not see that? How do they not know that? I mean, what's funny to me is, I think of the comment itself, how do you not see that? How do they not know that? Because it's so obvious to us that it should be obvious to them. Again, that's the inference we're making. Can awareness be coached? Absolutely, yes. It's called blind spots. People have blind spots all the time. Mike, we've been meeting as a company. Everybody, our whole team has been in town this week. How often do you hear me use the expression in meetings? Now, I could have a blind spot here, right? How often do you hear me say that?
It was in at least every meeting, and at least multiple times every meeting.
And see, when I say that to my team or our facilitators say it or people we coach it, I'm going to tell everybody there's a strategy that I'm using when I do that. And it's the strategy, and it's borderline selfish. And the strategy is, it gives me a get out of jail free card, right? Because if I put an opinion or a perspective out there, I don't want the opinion or perspective to come across as a fact, because it isn't. It's a perspective. It's an opinion. So when I strongly convey a thought or a perspective, I want to give myself room to go, now I could be missing something. And by the way, Mike, when we do that, when we say, I may have a blind spot here, it also creates psychological safety for someone like you or any other team members to go, yeah, I think you may. And let me share what I think it may be, right? And notice again the word may. It's not absolute. It's a possibility that can exist. So how do you coach self-awareness? I can tell you. I can give you the formula right now. The way you coach self-awareness is you ask questions to help people recognize their blind spots. Look, Mike's been doing a lot of work for us. Let me give you an example. So and Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this in a moment. One of the things we have Mike doing right now is, as our marketing manager, he will do some video work for us. And one of the new things that he's doing is he's logging video. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, is you watch a video and you identify certain clips from the video you like. The logging piece is for the person who's performing the editing process for the video. If it's a 26-minute video, Mike would say, oh, from 3 minutes and 15 seconds to 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I like that clip. So then the editor can go right to the clips. That's what logging is. So as we're going through this process, I've been coaching Mike on certain techniques and how to be an effective logger. So in a conversation we had this afternoon, I said, hey, Mike, do you have a process that when you're submitting that final log that says, hey, I did this, 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 so I know it's ready to submit? And so he's like, yeah, I don't. So I don't even know, like, that's a little bit of a blind spot because he doesn't have a system or process to do it. But that could be an example of a blind spot. He didn't even think like, oh, I should have a process here. I want our listeners to know that I am not exaggerating when I say this. I value self-awareness probably as high as any human skill. And part of the reason I value it so high is because You can't change a habit until you recognize the opportunity to change the habit. I bet on average, I recognize at least 3 blind spots a day. And I don't know what that says about me, but I don't see it as an insult. I don't see that as me being hard on myself. I like the fact that I can own my blind spots. I like the fact that I'm very hyper conscious of my blind spots. So, how do you coach blind spots? How do you coach increased awareness? You ask people open-ended, thought-provoking questions that help them recognize what they're missing, what they didn't consider. In corporate America, okay, and I shared this on a podcast a couple of years ago. I did some research on this. A human being makes on average 35,000 decisions a day. 35,000 decisions a day. And I've said that to a few people like, Mark, there's no way. There is. I actually did an experiment one morning where I tracked the amount of decisions I made in a 30-minute span. It's what I do next, what I look at, what am I going to eat, what am I going to drink, what am I going to wear, am I going to do this, I'm going to do that. All day, every day, we're making decisions. Every minute, we're making decisions. In corporate America, incorrect decisions are made every day. Why? Lots of reasons. One, because people haven't developed effective problem-solving skills. People haven't developed effective critical thinking skills. We coach in programs, we coach postmortems. We do an activity. We build a tool for companies called postmortems. We do programs, and one of my favorite programs we do is called Blameless Autopsy. Blameless Autopsy, where we're figuring out what was missed. The blind spot, right? The blind spots, what was missed. So if there's a lack of critical thinking and problem-solving skills, when people make decisions, there's blind spots. They don't think about certain things. They haven't taken things into consideration. They weren't aware of certain details. They weren't aware of the impact that decision they made. So that's what I mean. You can absolutely coach awareness. So the way you do it, what a coach does to know if someone's coachable, that if you start asking someone questions, thought-provoking, open-ended questions, and they're defensive, they're resistant, they're deflecting, they're fighting you, yeah, that's a good red flag to know that someone probably isn't coachable. As opposed to when you start asking those questions, someone says, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Geez, you know what? When I do this process, I don't usually take that into consideration. So, and there's even a level of accountability there, right? So you can absolutely coach awareness. Accountability, you know, Mike, I'm going to, and feel no pressure here. You know, do you find there are certain aspects of your life, and I'm not looking for names, but there's certain aspects in your life, certain relationships where you may not feel comfortable being accountable, that being accountable may not be super easy for you in certain situations. So assuming you feel comfortable answering that question, what are your thoughts on that?
I think there are scenarios where I would be apprehensive about taking accountability. Do I think that I wouldn't altogether? No, but it would give me pause and add more stress into maybe the task or the function or communication that I'm going to embark on. That's where I would have my reservations about it. I don't necessarily know if it would completely derail everything, but it would certainly give me pause.
And what would be the fear? I love the word you used, apprehensive, because it's so human and so real. What would be the fear if, God forbid, in those specific situations, the fear would be, or fears would be?
Yeah, there's a couple of fears that would probably play into it. It would be the fear of personal failure. It could be the fear of professional failure. And it could be the fear of just letting the opposing, or I don't want to say opposition, but the other party down. Those would be my biggest fears when I'm apprehensive towards taking accountability for things.
Yeah, great answer. And, you know, so much of being a great coach is facilitating psychological safety, which is creating space for people to speak their truth without consequence. And if you're accountable and you own your stuff, there can be consequences for that. And they're very wide ranging. So if you were accountable at past times in your life, let's say when you were a kid, when you did admit your mistakes and you got punished, you got yelled at, you were made to feel less than, boy, I don't know that I would want to relive that experience. There were consequences to that. In your last job, maybe when you were accountable, you got certain responsibilities taken away from you that you really enjoyed. Maybe there was some kind of consequence where your boss gave you the cold shoulder for a week because you owned the mistake. And this is real, everybody. And I have to tell you that, again, the whole premise of looking inward before blaming outward is understanding that when people aren't aware, is it because they're trying to be difficult? Or is it they have blind spots? If people aren't accountable, is it they just don't value taking responsibility? Or are there some fears there that are real due to basic past life experiences? So you can see that when I talk about, before we even get to motivated, when we talk about those three pieces of coachability, it's not black and white. And when I say if they're not aware, accountable, or motivated, bye-bye, they're gone. That's not fair, because the reason they may lack aware, accountable, motivated isn't necessarily black and white. And I talked about this on a previous podcast. If you're coaching someone and you've had 3 conversations with them and they're still not, quote unquote, listening, following directions, applying what they're learning, well, guess what? I would love to listen to your coaching conversations, because you may not be a great coach. You may not set clear expectations. You may not be surfacing what the barriers and obstacles that are in the way of why they're not aware, accountable, and motivated. Because if you're not a profound question asker, if you don't excel at listening to understand and not reply, then how could you improve their self-awareness if you're not, if it's you talking, if it's your agenda, and if you're not asking the right questions? So it's not black and white. It's you have a role in it, they have a role in it. And the first aspect of knowing someone's coachable is you looking in the mirror and evaluating your ability to coach. And so if I watched you, if you said, Mark, I'm a great coach, if I watched you, what would I see you doing that would say, oh, God, my God, you really are a great coach? Or if you don't think you're a good coach, my intention wouldn't be to beat you up. I would ask you the same question. Why are you being so hard on yourself? Why are you saying you're not a good coach? Either way, we need a success template for it. But if you can't be personally accountable, if you're not self-aware of where you're missing as a coach, if you're not motivated to do better, then where does the problem really lie? Now, last piece of this before we shift gears is the motivation. So motivation is something, and I've been talking to a lot of our clients about this recently. I strongly believe you can inspire motivation. So Mike, tell me if you can relate to this, okay? Think about something in your life, personally, professionally, maybe when you were at Syracuse, go Orange, man. Think about something in your life that you weren't confident in. You didn't, and I would argue, not only were you not confident in, maybe your lack of confidence even manifested into, I don't like to do this, which is often connecting point to not being confident. Can you think of something like that where you would argue, not only do you love it today, but you're incredibly motivated to do it?
Yeah, I would say creative writing.
Okay, talk about that.
So All through high school, and that's when it was at the low point. I was constantly having to do revisions, constantly being told that it needs to be tweaked, it needs to be edited, et cetera, et cetera. And over that course, really just started to hate having to write things and lay it all out. But in my latter years, probably senior, maybe junior year of high school, I started to get less edits. I started to get better at it, and I saw improvement. So I started to develop that passion for it. But the constant, the constant pushback that I had made me dislike it strongly at first. And now I've grown into really loving it, and it's what I'm passionate about in work.
Now, interestingly enough, was there a person in your creative writing journey leading up to today that inspired you to want to do better? Now, it could be they were hard on you, that at the time you didn't like it, but now looking back, you would argue that it pushed you and inspired you to do better. Was there a person along the way? There may not have been, but was there a person or something that inspired you along the way?
You know what? I'll give the credit to my mother.
Okay.
And and the reason I
Who was
say
a
that,
teacher? Was she was a coach? I know she coached
she
tennis.
coached tennis. She wasn't a teacher. I'm giving the credit to my mother because she was driving me for the grades themselves, but that was all spurred by the actual written efforts and everything like that. I don't think that any one specific teacher or anything like that motivated me. It was the desire to satisfy and get approval from my parents.
So, at the risk of putting words in your mouth, because that's not my intention here, was your mom really trying to inspire you by standards? Like grades, standards, achieving? Like, was that the inspirational strategy?
Yes, it was. It was setting the higher standards.
Right.
She knew I could do better. She knew that I could do even better. And that's why I kept wanting to actually achieve it.
And what's so interesting about Mike, because I know most of you probably don't know him. What's interesting about Mike, 25 years old?
25.
25. What's interesting is Mike exemplifies one of our cultural norms that we coach companies on, as well as anybody, not just his age. I would say among the top I've ever met in my life, which is to see feedback as a gift. And anybody who knows me knows I'm tough on people. I push people hard to inspire them to get better. And Mike just rolls with it. Like now he might go home at night and be like that SOB. I don't know. But he rolls with it for real. And I think, Mike, I think your mother kind of helped set the tone for that kind of mindset. And I think what's interesting is the reason I bring up this is because inspiring motivation is very much possible. And I think when people feel like when we make these presumptive assumptions like, well, they don't care. They're clearly not motivated to do that, or they don't have any passion around that. Look in the mirror. I mean, I don't know about you, but I am typically not that motivated to do anything I'm not passionate about. I don't know too many human beings that don't enjoy or don't feel confident in certain things and still are incredibly motivated to do those things. So when we say aware, accountable, and motivated are the coaching success template or the coachable success template, understand that this isn't necessarily looking inward before blaming outward, but imagine as part of your coaching strategy, you're asking the standard question, what would motivate you to do what I'm asking you to do, as a way to uncover people's motivators and uncover what's standing in the way. Because if it is a motivation issue, that may be a cover for confidence. It could be a cover for skills. It could be a cover for lack of knowledge. So let's not blanket motivation and make these unilateral criticisms of people. So going back to where we started, with kids, coaches may not do a great job of setting expectations. If you're a sports coach for a youth sports coach, how many youth sports coaches actually have training on how to be a great coach? They're given that opportunity because they know the sport, hopefully, probably most of the time. They know the sport. And you know why else a lot of those guys coach or women coach? Because they have kids on the team. But do they actually know how to coach effectively? I mean, every parent who has had their kids in any extracurricular activity, sports, music, theater, arts, anything, doesn't matter. Think about this for a minute. If your son or daughter played for a coach, at the end of that season, could you look in the mirror? Could you say to yourself, my kid's improved? My kid's developed under that coach. I know. I'm going to take pickleball lessons from Mike. And when I take pickleball lessons, I should be able to say, I've gotten better. But remember now, when I say I should be able to say, that responsibility lies on both of us, right? Mike being a good coach and me taking the time to practice and apply what I've learned. So this is really important that most youth sports coaches don't know how to coach. And by the way, you know one other criteria? And this is huge. You know why other reasons parents become youth sports coaches? Because they played themselves. Big whoop. You know something? We see it in corporate America all the time. People who are really good at their job, who are long tenured employees at the company, who are very loyal. Oh my God, let's do right by them. We should promote them into a leadership role. Okay. Why? They don't have any experience being a leader. What? And then, of course, you hear, well, how are they going to learn? Okay, fair. And how about we give them the requisite skills and knowledge before they get in that role so they're set up for success? So you get the analogy, right, Mike? If you played sports and now you're coaching, it means you can play it. It doesn't mean you can coach it. And the same thing in leadership. Now, you've heard me talk about in this show you've heard me use the term fears and barriers. And the last thing I want to cover on this show today is I want to talk about a concept that we use in coaching all the time called fake problem, real problem, and root cause. And when I think about coaching someone, the first thing I think about is if I have to coach someone on something, that implies that they are disappointing, frustrating, or not meeting the expectations of, you ready for this, themselves, their peers, their boss, the company, something. That's why I have to coach them in the first place. And if you're buying into the premise that most people aren't malicious and don't disappoint, frustrate on purpose, then the implication is if I have to coach them, what's in the way of them doing what we all want them to do? So I want to make sure I'm solving the real problem. I want to make sure I'm understanding the barriers that are in the way, not the surface level problem, right? So if Mike is doing a video log and he misses some details, well, that's a fake problem. That's a surface level problem. The real problem is there's no process. We need a process. Mike and I were talking earlier today that whenever there's a disconnect, again, misaligned expectations, disappointment, whatever, I was saying to him today, my rule of thumb is there's either no process, a hole in the process, or someone's not following a process. So that's a real problem kind of thought process. If Mike's doing creative writing for us, marketing posts and things like that, and I look at the posts and there's grammar issues. This hasn't happened. I'm just saying this example. There's grammar issues, there's spelling issues, there's sentence structure issues. So what am I going to do? Is coaching me saying to Mike, hey, Mike, you can't have spelling mistakes, man. We can't like Mike's like, oh, geez, really, Mark? Because I thought that would be a great idea. I thought marketing posts with spelling mistakes would be ideal for our reputation and standards. No. So, fake problem, there's spelling and grammar mistakes. The real problem is maybe Mike isn't using an editing tool. Maybe he's not using Grammarly, or maybe he's not using one of the multiple editing tools out there. So if I'm coaching Mike and I'm solving that fake surface level problem, I'm not going to solve the real problem. I'm going to keep having to talk to him. And the barriers that are in the way of people doing what you want them to do are so vast. We've talked about it: knowledge, skills, confidence, awareness, motivation, accountability. How about this one? Being enabled. Being enabled. Now, Mike happened to work at his last company, and I loved his old boss because I know she pushed him hard too. But what if his old boss, this is made up, but just roll with me for a second. What if all the marketing posts he did his last job, his boss never checked any of the work? She didn't really have that high standards around sentence structure and needless words. Well, why would he be good at that? If he hasn't been mentored that way, if no one's ever taught him that way, that would be a barrier. No one's ever set that precedent or standard with him. So that could be a barrier, and being enabled. And one of the biggest barriers in the workplace is capacity. And when we talk about capacity, what capacity means is if you were coaching someone and you asked them the question, you were delegating a task or project, and you looked at them and you said, hey, Mike, I got to ask you, what tells you that you have the capacity to take on this project? It's a very open-ended, collaborative question. Now, assuming Mike feels psychological safety to truthfully answer that question, what I'm after is, what if the person says, or Mike says in this case, Mark, I'm glad you asked. I don't. This is the part of coaching where so many leaders at every level panic, because by putting out the question, they're worried about that exact answer. I don't, because the leader who's delegating the task or project needs the work done. Now, what am I supposed to do? I asked the question because I was trying to be a good leader and supportive and good coach, and Mike said no. So now what am I supposed to do? Well, the reality is, just because Mike said no doesn't end the conversation. I would look at my team member and I would say, okay, I didn't realize that. Can we take a look at your priorities? Can I get a sense of what you're up against right now? And then once I have a better understanding of priorities, maybe we can reprioritize. Maybe we can change deadlines, whatever. But now it gives me an opportunity to have the discussion. So it's not that you're stuck and you can't go anywhere with his answer. It's the opposite. Mike's answer allows you to progress the conversation because now we've surfaced a barrier. He doesn't believe he has the capacity to do this. And I can't say this enough to our listeners. Your opinion as a leader doesn't matter. If Mike tells you he doesn't have the capacity to do it, and you as the leader are mumbling to yourself in your head, you're going, oh, you have plenty of time. You have the capacity. That's what you're saying. By the way, you may be right. You may be right. He may have plenty of time. But guess what? If Mike lacks time management skills, if he doesn't know how to organize his work effectively, he may not be at overcapacity, but because of his lack of skills and awareness, he may. So it's not malicious when people say they don't have the capacity. They're not trying to automatically get out of work. They're not trying to shirk their responsibility. It could be there's barriers and fears in the way. By the way, fear, what if Mike's answer, I don't have the capacity, what if the truth behind that is because if he took that on, he thinks he'd suck at it. So now if he thinks he'd suck at it, maybe he's making an excuse because he doesn't want to admit he would suck at it or thinks he would suck at it. These all connect to fears and barriers. So play this out in summary. What tells you have the capacity to take it on? I don't. Great. This is an opportunity to reprioritize. And then after you reprioritize, you discover your worst fear. He has plenty of time on his hands, right? And I'm going to make it harder for the leader. not only does he have plenty of time on his hands, but let's take it even a step further. He's awesome at organization. He's awesome at prioritization. He's doing everything well. And you find out it is just an excuse because you've coached the situation so effectively. You vetted out and surfaced all the potential real issues and root causes of that issue that your worst fear is, yeah, he's just trying to avoid work. He's not a team player. He's making excuses. Again, great news because you've got clarity, because you were a good coach. You surfaced all these things. And now you can look at Mike and say, Mike, I got to be honest with you. Looking at your workload, knowing that I do think you're prioritizing effectively and you do have good time management skills, I don't know that we're aligned on this. I believe you do have the time. So I think we got to explore this a little bit because maybe I'm not capturing the real problem still. And I think we need to explore. That's it. Then you just continue to have the courageous conversation. It doesn't end the topic. And if you are not asking questions like what would motivate you to do what I'm asking you to do, what tells you that you have the capacity to take this on, and you're not asking those questions because you're worried about the answers, let me tell you, that's a fake problem. Because if you're not asking questions because you're worried about the answers, what you're really saying is worried about the answers is a fake problem. Knowing how to handle those answers is the real problem. So this fears and barriers thing is real. It has got to go off in your head that as a coach, if someone isn't doing what you want them to do, what is in the way? Something is in the way. You've got to surface that. You've got to figure it out before you can even start to coach them. Because until you figure out that obstacle, they're not going to be able to progress the way you need them to progress. So, final thought for today is, I used the term earlier, be a profound question asker. What's the success template for being a profound question asker? Making sure you are consistently asking open-ended, thought-provoking, layered questions. And I will leave you with this thought about coaching and coachability for today. When I start coaching new clients, one of the first questions I ask them is, have you coached before? Let's say they say yes. My next question is, what was your experience like with that coach? Because I'm trying to understand not only what their experience was, what they're walking in with expectation-wise in this experience. So when they share the experience, I'm looking for two things. What did you love about what the other coach did? And what didn't you love about what the other coach did? And what worked and what didn't work? And what I'm trying to say here, everybody, is when I ask those open-ended questions, what worked and didn't work, I'm starting to find out their coachability level. Because when I ask those questions, I'm listening very intently to their answers. And when they criticize their past coach, it could be justified, and it could be excuses, and it could be deflections. So that's my first stab at seeing how they handle that question and how they look at barriers and how they look at obstacles and how their coach was responsible and how they were personally responsible for those things. So, as a final thought for today, coachability, aware, accountable, and motivated, look inward before blaming outward, surface those barriers by asking open-ended, thought-provoking, layered questions, uncover the real problem, not the fake problem, and figure out what the root causes of those problems are, those real problems are. Because I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, people are not frustrating, disappointing you, and not meeting your expectations to upset you. So with that said, for Mike Kamali, I'm Mark Altman. Thank you for joining us for another edition of iCommunicate.